he is good. For he is good. Give thanks to the Lord. For he is good. For he is good. Give thanks to the Lord. For he is good. For he is good. His love endures forever.
His love will reign
forevermore.
His power will reign
forevermore.
His grace will reign
forevermore.
His peace will reign
forevermore.
His love will reign
forevermore.
His power will reign
forevermore.
His love
endures forever.
This morning, very thankful to be extended the opportunity to speak to you all. So it was 15 years ago when I first came to Central North. Do you guys realize that? 15 years ago. And so a lot has happened since then. With this visit upcoming, one of the men actually reached out and requested a topic for this morning, and the topic that they requested was intentional parenting. And so we're going to be talking about that. I don't know where he got the idea that I had something to do with parenting. Just these, maybe the 4 kids had something to do with it. But and it was funny last night at Auntie Janet's house. That we saw the pressure being placed upon a young couple that will go unnamed to have children. And I said, well, once you have 4, no one puts any pressure on you anymore. All the pressure is gone. So, but in talking about parenting this morning, we're going to ask the question, is my child safe? It was actually a little over 8 years ago now when I first became intensely focused on my child's safety, because that was when my first child was born. Some of you remember that because we were actually here at that time. Ezekiel was born here at Osborne Park, and so you shared in that time with us. And so when Ezekiel was born, the birth had some complications, and Chantel was laboring for a long time. He had a big head, and he still has a big head. And he made things even harder because he had his hand like this. He comes out and his hand is like this. And so all of it was very, very difficult. And in the course of her laboring, the heartbeat was going down and all of that. And so the first thing when he comes out, the dad cuts the cord. I didn't think I'd be doing any of that, by the way. I thought it would be a northern hemisphere experience for me. I didn't have any intentions of doing anything, but the Aussie mid's wives got rid of all that right away. They said, all right, go down here, hold this, do that, and so we got very, very acquainted with the whole birthing process very quickly. But I cut the cord, and then they took Ezekiel over to this machine to check his vitals. And, so these machines are, of course, designed to do that quickly and efficiently. And, of course, like all hospital machines, they're hopeless, And so it just was alarming and making all this terrible racket, this terrible noise. And meanwhile, Ezekiel is just screaming and screaming. And so, and then the nurses are all cluttered around this machine trying to get it to work. And I remember welling up within me a feeling of it's a mixture of anger and frustration and a desire to keep my son from whatever that machine was doing to him. And that was really, like I said, the first time that I felt that intense desire to keep my son safe. And with every one of my children, I'm very focused on their safety. Now, I do believe that boys need to have adventures. It's not that kind of safety that really I focus upon these days, but a different kind of safety that we're going to explore. It is that more physical kind of safety that is in David's heart as he gets the news of a battle. If you're not familiar with 2 Samuel chapter 18, what's happened here is that David has been ousted from his throne and from Jerusalem. He is on the run for his life with a band of his soldiers. And there's essentially a civil war in Israel at this time. And so a massive army has come to find David, to kill him, to kill all of his soldiers. A battle commences there in the forests of Ephraim. And we're getting in this reading that we've just had the outcome where 2 messengers come to David and tell him what's happened in the battle. And of course, even though the forces vastly outnumbered them, David's campaigners were much more experienced and they had won the battle. But David wasn't interested in them winning the battle. There was one thing in his heart at that moment. And so the first runner comes and says, "You have been delivered." David says, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" I don't know. I don't know what happened to Absalom. Oh, step aside. The second man comes. "You have been avenged." is the young man Absalom safe? It's the only thing he cared about at that time. We're going to have two simple points as we kind of move through this lesson. The first, we're going to examine this account. In particular, we're going to think about David's timing, and then we're going to think about our children's safety. So, David's timing. Now, what makes this very interesting that he is interested in his son's safety? We say that's very natural. All parents are, of course, if there's been a battle and your child is involved, of course you're going to desire your son's safety. Well, what makes this very interesting is that Absalom is actually the reason for the battle. He has usurped David's throne. He has, at this time, not just driven David into exile, but he is actually the one who is seeking his life. And if Absalom had his way on that day, David and all of his soldiers would be dead. That is what Absalom has committed to in going into this battle. He brought all of his forces to come down upon his father and his forces in hopes that he would be able to kill his father and any who supported him. And so that obviously makes the timing, quite interesting. And what makes it even more interesting is that when he gets the news, which is, of course, the Cushite, in delivering this news, you have to feel sorry for him. The way he delivers it in verse number 32, may the enemies of my Lord the king and all who rise against you to do harm be like that young man. And the implication is the young man's dead, and all the enemies of David should be dead. But what follows is this outpouring of emotion from David that stems through the end of this chapter into the next. The king was deeply moved. He went to the chamber over the gate and he wept. And as he went, he said, "O my son Absalom, my son, if only I had died in your place. O Absalom, my son, my son." David cared more for his son Absalom than he cared for his kingdom, than he cared for the kingdom's citizens, than he cared for his own life. He wished that he could be dead and that Absalom could be alive, which, again, is a thing that a parent might experience, but not something that would go through the mind of a rationally thinking king who realizes that his reign is good for Israel. The reign of Absalom would have been terrible for Israel. And it actually takes one of his experienced campaigners, a man by the name of Joab, to kind of shake him out of all of this. He's still crying out in verse number 4, "Oh, my son Absalom, Absalom, my son, my son." Joab comes to him and says, "Today you have disgraced all your servants who today have saved your life, the lives of your sons and your daughters, the lives of your wives and the lives of your concubines, in that you love your enemies and hate your friends. For you have declared today that you regard neither princes nor servants. For today I perceive that if Absalom had lived and all of us had died today, that it would have well pleased you." So again, he cared more for his son than he cared for anyone or anything else. But the question that we have to pause and ask as observers of this text is, did he really care? You say, well, of course he cared. My son Absalom, you see his heart crying out in this moment. Of course he cared. Well, no, did he really care? The thing that you discover in parenting is that emotion and reason don't always go hand in hand. And kids realize this, by the way. We have, we've experienced in our sons, and I don't know about our daughter can do no wrong. She's 3 months, and so, of course, we'll put her aside for a moment. But in the first 3, we've got, typical birth order things happening. We've got the leader first son, and, like all those kind of things. And so with our third son, we kind of, I nicknamed him, I don't know if you're familiar with the U.S. Dennis the Menace. So I call him Dennis, because he always gets into things. He's always getting into everything. But he has such a sweet way of doing it. And I remember, when he was very young, I was like, he can't be the baby. Like, he absolutely cannot be the baby. He's too good at it. And he would, he has this way even now, as a little 2-year-old, he can come up to you and you're focused on something else, and he'll take one hand, put it here, and take one hand, put it there, and he'll turn your face to him. Cookies. And it's like, well, of course I want to give you, no. But the thing is that the emotional response in that moment, is guided by that kind of thing. But the reasoned response realizes, no, you don't need to have cookies. In fact, you didn't finish your breakfast. In fact, it's still sitting on the table, and you need to go back and have that before you can have anything else. Emotion and reason don't go hand in hand. And as parents, we have to realize that intense emotional care is not true care. True care transcends emotion and thinks instead of the thing that the child perceives to be a need or a desire. It puts that subservient to what is the child's true needs and what should be their desire. David cared about Absalom in the typical way a parent cares about a child, but he didn't care when it mattered. And as you're reflecting upon not just this chapter, but the chapters that come before it, really there should have been more reflection, more often on true safety as opposed to this emotional safety that David really was after. When Absalom, what made Absalom do all of this? Well, it's a series of events that goes all the way back to chapter 12, and we'll talk about the fact that maybe it goes back a little bit further than that. But in chapter 12, Absalom's half-brother Amnon raped Absalom's sister Tamar, and David did absolutely nothing. You ever known parents to do that? To not respond in any way when their children do abhorrent things? Happens all the time. And so Absalom saw this. He saw his father do absolutely nothing when his sister got raped. And then he made the decision to actually kill Amnon. He plotted it out. He waited. Revenge is a dish best served cold. He waited for maybe David to do something. David didn't do anything. And so eventually he takes his opportunity and he kills Amnon. But David didn't do anything. On neither of those occasions was he truly seeking Absalom's safety. Because if he had been seeking his son's safety, then he would have said, I need to do something when my children do something wrong. If he had been seeking his son's safety, then he would have even responded when this son now did something wrong. Though it might be reasonable in the eyes of some, it was not his place to exact this judgment. It was not proper or right for him to kill his brother Amnon at a feast. That's actually where and when it happened. And so that wasn't right, but David didn't seek his son's safety because he didn't do anything. And when Absalom was allowed to return without repentance or reconciliation, he goes into exile after he kills his brother, and then it's actually Joab, surprisingly, who pleads with David to bring Absalom back. And David's like, okay, I'll let him come back to Israel, but he can't come and see my face again. And this weird kind of half forgiveness that sometimes we can be guilty as parents of extending to our children who have fallen away from the church, where maybe we will allow them into certain situations, but not into others, where we will be friendly to them at times, but not at other times. And this sort of weird thing that happens rather than a firm stance. There was no firm stance from David. There was this nothing response from David, as had been the case before. And so he was not interested in his son's safety. And when Absalom then takes the advantage of not being allowed into the king's court, but being outside of it, and the people coming to it, and he says to them, oh, well, wouldn't I be a great king? And they agree, because he always agreed with them, right? And so when he's doing all of that, he does nothing, David does nothing. When Absalom declares himself to be king, David does nothing. He goes and he runs away. At no point was he interested in Absalom's safety. But really the story goes back before then. You might argue that the reason David isn't doing something is because he had himself failed. And that's something to reflect upon as parents. I remember my mom, my mom has departed, and she reconciled, to the Lord before she did so. But there was a time in her life when she was not faithful to the Lord, and there was in that time also a divorce, and just a lot of bad things happened in that time of her life. Later on in her life, she felt, even though she had the opportunity to serve the church and to teach, she said, how could I teach someone anything? And I said, Mom, you're the perfect person to teach people things. Because it's not only a life that's well lived that gives you information to provide to others, it's actually a life that's seen the sin and the scars from that can convey, well, this is what you need not to do. But David, when he sinned, neither was he seeking his son's safety before the sin, nor was he seeking his son's safety after the sin. because again, maybe his sin produced that period of inactivity. But when he's up there on the rooftop and the kings have gone out to battle and he doesn't go out to battle even though he's a king, he's not seeking his son's safety. When he sees that woman and he desires her and he commits adultery with her, he's not seeking his son's safety. When he tries to cover the whole thing up by having the woman's husband brought back to try to cover up the pregnancy that has resulted from the adulterous affair, he's not seeking his son's safety. At no point in this story is he seeking his son's safety, but you can go back even further. When he refused to take on God's plan of one man, one woman, for one lifetime, he wasn't seeking his son's safety. I mean, you could say all that about the Old Testament, that God was overlooking this period of ignorance, and maybe polygamy was a part of that period then, but at the same time, that the information was there, and Jesus hearkened to that information, didn't he? Have you not read? Well, David had read. He wrote Psalm 119 in praising the very first 5 books of the Bible that contain the teaching that Jesus is talking about. But again, at none of these points was he seeking his son's safety. Now, I want to make 3 observations before we start thinking about our children's safety and think about how we can turn this negative lesson into a positive one. There will come a time when it will be too late to seek your child's safety. And it might not necessarily be when your child is dead. In the course of life, in the course of crafting a soul, there comes a time when a soul becomes so hardened and turned against God, a conscience seared with a hot iron, that really there is not going to be a change or there's going to be no effect upon that person. Now, I can't see that time, and you can't either, and so I would never say to anyone to give up on anyone. That's not our job. Our job isn't to give up on anyone. Our job is to be the living extension of Jesus to people. We are the visible body of Christ, and so we have to try to work with people, but there comes a time when really it is too late. But, number 2, as we think about this account, if you're not seeking for souls to be safe, you're not seeking safety at all. You're not seeking safety at all. Please understand this, parents. Because I know what it's like, in Australia. I've lived here for a period myself. There is this desire to establish yourself, and there are great barriers to doing that. You see the cost of housing, you see the cost of education, you see the value of education, you see the advancements that the educated are able to make in terms of their career and also in terms of their wealth. And you want your child to be educated, you want your child to be wealthy, you want them to be able to have a house, and all of these things. But realize that at the end of the day, if they get all of that, educational achievements, a beautiful house, but the Lord is not in their lives, none of it matters. Not one bit. What shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Have you ever thought about that in relation to your children? Really thought about that? What's worth more than the soul of your child? Let that be your motivation. Let that be what you think about. Now, I said that there's going to come a time when it's too late to seek your child's safety. And I said that to seek your child's safety is to seek the safety of your child's soul. But number 3, it's better to seek safety today than it is tomorrow. Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth. You read that, Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 1. You might have read that, and maybe that you look in the mirror and the hair's a bit gray or something like that. That's the effect of having 4 kids. You start seeing the grays pop out. You read Ecclesiastes 12, verse 1. Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, and you're like, too late. The youth is the time behind me. But I want you to realize something about the days of your youth. You are younger today than you will be tomorrow. Today is the relative day of your youth. And so today, even if you have failed to ask the question, is my child safe? Today is the day to start asking that question. So what are you going to do? All right, well, let's talk about seeking safety for our children. There is so much that we could talk about in this, and so we're really going to hopefully just whet your appetite and turn you in a direction. All right? It's interesting that this failed father, David, and this terrible adulterous union that after Uriah dies can become a normal union between him and Bathsheba. Uriah's dead, and so she's no longer married at that point, and they get officially and really married. There's a son that comes to that union, and his name is Solomon. Now, Solomon was an incredibly wise individual, in theory, not always in practice. But God chose to take this man who would end up becoming a failed father himself, and through his Holy Spirit called this man to deliver something that would stand in stark contrast both to David and even Solomon himself. A body of teaching about parenting. It's the book of Proverbs. Now, you say, the Proverbs, I thought that was you get a definition of the book of Proverbs, like a collection of wise sayings. And, it's like the Bible's version of Confucius Says or something like that. No, it's not. This is from the first 9 chapters perspective. This is material that God gave, okay, yes, to enrich your life, and yes, to call you, as the scriptures say, that God has revealed to us all things that pertain to life and godliness, to call you to live a better life and to figure out how you can be godly. Yes, the Proverbs will help you do that, but really, as you look at those first 9 chapters, it's set up to be a book about parenting. And that's what you're going to see for those first 9 chapters. My son here, my son here, my son here. A father speaking to a son and teaching a son. And not only teaching us as God's children, but teaching us as parents how to do our job. So let's think about what it tells us. There's going to be, like I said, too much for us to cover this morning. We're whetting the appetite. Number one, it teaches us something about the work of parenting. United we stand, divided or absent we fall. I want you to read this series of verses with me in Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 8 beginning. Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 8. It says, "My son, hear the instruction of your father. Do not forsake the law of your mother." Chapter 6 and verse 20. We'll read these just kind of back to back, just to allow them to have an effect. Chapter 6 and verse 20. "My son, keep your father's command, and do not forsake the law of your mother." Chapter 10 and verse 1. "A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is the grief of his mother." Chapter 15 and verse 20. "A wise son makes a father glad, but a foolish man despises his mother." Chapter 23 and verse 22. It says, "Listen to your father who begot you. Do not despise your mother when she is old." What do you notice about that series of verses? What do you see? You see mom and you see dad. Mom and dad. What do you not see? You don't see Sunday school programs. You don't see family camps. You don't see school, of course. You don't see Christian friends or peer groups. You see mom. You see dad. In God's ideal situation, we have mom and dad serving as partners in a spiritual quest. Dad, of course, is the head of the family, but mom is assisting him as her head, and they are working together to bring up children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Fathers, the responsibility of that really stops at you. You are the one that God is going to call into account one day. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4, fathers are the ones who are told to bring up their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And so you have to take this very seriously, but you want to have cooperation between you and your spouse. Now, we speak about God's ideal, and I have to pause and speak about what happens sometimes in the real. And the reality is that sometimes you will have a dad who is not interested in spiritual guidance. You might have a mom who's not interested in spiritual guidance. Don't let that stop you by any means. It will, obviously mean that the church here will have to enfold that family and focus upon that family and be whatever that child might be missing in a very real way. When I think about my own upbringing, there's divorce in my past. There was an absent father, very, like in middle school, dad left and he did not take visitation. He was gone. But I tell you what I had in my life that made a difference in my life, and it was a series of Christian men who took a focused effort with me, spent time with me, who took me out to eat and talked to me about my problems. So men, don't allow these less than ideal situations to go unnoticed, right? But again, speaking about the ideal, mom and dad, if you're both here, you've got to work together. You've got to be parents together. And all the more, if you have not yet entered into this phase of life, please, please, please realize what these verses are saying. at the very forefront of your mind when you think about someone you want to get married to, you need to ask the question, could my teaching and her teaching, or my teaching and his teaching that we're going to give our children one day, could those teachings be interchangeable with one another like they are in the book of Proverbs? Do I have confidence that this person is going to say what I would say, that they're going to speak in faith as I speak in faith? Please think about that. Number 2, the Proverbs teach us that consistency is absolutely key. We read Proverbs 1 and verse 8 and chapter 6 and verse 20, but I want to just focus on one of these to note something that's in the New King James Version but isn't in some of the other translations. Chapter 1 and verse 8, "My son, hear the instruction of your father. Do not forsake the law of your mother." Now, you might have something like teaching or instruction in your translation, but the word that's actually found there is the word Torah, the word law. But not as in a law, as in a body of teaching. And so when we think about what we're trying to do as parents, we have to realize something about the word consistency. It's not just doing things all the time. That's a part of it, but it's doing things with actually a plan in mind. Thinking about what we want the outcome to be, and then working today to achieve that outcome. And so what do we want for our child's future? And again, at the forefront of our minds has to be their soul's well-being. I want my children to read, but not because I care about them reading stuff or even doing well in the working world. I want them to be able to read Scripture. That's why I teach my children to read. And on it goes. When I try to teach my children things about life, yes, obviously I want them to work. I don't care what they do. I don't care how successful they are financially or how much educational achievements they obtain. But I do want them to be prepared to take the responsibility of work on board and to be able to understand their role, our boys, their role as being men in the house one day who are providing for their family. And so we think about those things and we work towards that end. And so consistency is key. A Torah, a law, has to come from mom and dad. Now let's think about a few more things from this proverbial father of the first 9 chapters of the book of Proverbs. Number 1, realize that he taught by example. Chapter 4 and verse 11. Chapter 4 and verse 11. It says, "I have taught you in the way of wisdom. I have led you in right paths." I have taught you. I have led you. Your children are watching, and they will follow you. I have this habit when I get frustrated. I do a raspberry. And so what do I see my little Elijah doing? Well, okay, all right. I mean, that's a very blunt reminder to me that he's watching me. All right, but more than that, they're watching you all the time. They're absorbing what they see. And so when you go out of here and you say, boy, that Patrick talked a long time, or, well, it's kind of hot this morning, I didn't want to come, and you start going all that, the children are listening to all of this, even when you think that they aren't. And they're absorbing what you're doing, and what you're doing can either confirm what you're saying or it can cancel out what you're saying. You have to teach by example. Number 2, he demonstrated total dependence on God. Chapter 3, verse 1, "My son, do not forget my law, but let your heart keep my commands. For length of days and long life and peace they will be to you." Always talking positively about God and his way. "Let not mercy and truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart, and so find favor and high esteem in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths." When is the last time that your children have seen you trust God? When was the last time they've seen you step out in faith? When was the last time they've seen you, instead of using a holiday for, just a holiday, say, we're going to take some time off and we're going to go to, the lectureship across the country, or we're going to do something, of a spiritual nature. We're going to focus on the Lord for a period of time. When's the last time they've seen you, purpose as a family to sacrifice for something meaningful for the church and for the Lord's work? If they don't see you depending upon God, they will not depend upon God. Number 3, he made wisdom incredibly attractive. One thing that stands out to me, especially as a father of boys, when I read this first 9 chapters of the book of Proverbs, is that over and over again, notice how wisdom is portrayed. I'll give you an example. Chapter 3 and verse 13. "Happy is the man who finds wisdom." That's a thing, right? "And the man who gains understanding, for her proceeds are better than the profits of silver, and her gain than fine gold. She is more precious than rubies, and all the things that you may desire cannot compare with her." What's he doing with wisdom? Well, as boys get older, mine are not at that age yet, but their attentions and one of them is actually, but their attentions and their focus turn more and more to ladies, to young girls. All right. Well, Father says, I realize that, and so he says, let's talk about the most attractive woman in the world, wisdom. Let's talk about why she is beautiful. Let's talk about what she can bring into your life, how your life can be better through her. And over again, the teaching of God is associated with concrete, real, positive blessings, not abstract things that only affect one day a week. And so often it is that Christianity is boiled down to that, where we really, we're like, we just get our Sunday right, nothing else matters. No, God speaks about every minute of your life, every moment of your life. He has some information that's going to help you and guide you. You show your children that and show them the value of wisdom. He brought wisdom into everyday life. Chapter 6 and Proverbs chapter 6 and verse 6. He says to his son, who evidently has a little bit of trouble sleeping in, he says, go to the ant, you sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no captain, overseer, or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer and gathers her food in the harvest. So what is he doing? He's walking along, his son slept in today. Look at that ant down there. What does that teach you? God will give you innumerable opportunities to talk about him every single day if your eyes are open. We were looking at the sunset as we were at the beach the other night. And the sun, is dipping down. And I talked to the boys. I said, hey, if we were to go out further in the water there, the sun would still be up. And another sunset would be beginning. And all around the world right now, there are sunsets happening in different places. Different scenes are unfolding. Isn't this beautiful? You know who makes all of those sunsets? God does. And just that little moment to stop and think about God in that moment. We also, as we think about bringing wisdom and God into everyday life, every single day, we at the end of the day, we stop as a family. We go around and we say, well, what are you thankful for from God today? What has God done for you today? And so we go around, and they're not allowed to repeat. And if we catch patterns or we catch them giving rote answers, we're like, no, you can't say that again. What else are we thankful for? And at first, when they're little kids, that gets frustrating. They're like, I just want to give an answer. No, we want to be thankful to God. It's not about getting the thing first or saying something. It's about actually being thankful to God. And so we do that every single day. Number 5. He talked about life-shaping decisions openly and honestly in Proverbs chapter 5 and verse number 1. My son, pay attention to my wisdom, lend your ear to my understanding, that you may preserve discretion and keep your lips may keep knowledge. I want you to choose the right paths and know the right things, for the lips of an immoral woman drip honey. The word immoral is actually the Hebrew word for like a stranger or a foreigner. And it's just relating to the wrong kind of woman, in his son's life. And he talks about her bluntly and openly. Her lips drip honey, her mouth is smoother than oil, but in the end she is as bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps lay hold of hell. Ponder the path of her life. Her ways are unstable. You don't know them. You don't know what she's going to do next. You start to talk to your child when they're young about these big life decisions and talk about them in realistic ways. There won't ever be that awkward time where all of a sudden, now we've got to talk about the birds and the bees or something like that. Or all of a sudden they're interested in the wrong kind of person. They want to date someone who's outside of the Lord's church, who's a foreigner from the standpoint of this text. You talk about it all the time, and then as those feelings awaken in them, you can start to guide them in constructive and positive ways. That's what the father of this text does. Like I said, I just really hope that we've whet the appetite with all of this, and there's so much more that we could say. But I need you to say one thing with me this morning. All right? When it comes to getting wisdom in your home, done is better than perfect. I need everyone to say this with me this morning. Done, can I hear it? Let me hear it. Done is better than perfect. We are imperfect people, right? I am an imperfect father, all right? But at the same time, if I'm waiting for the perfect action, it's not going to come. I remember being, when Ezekiel was very little, I was like, I've got to, we've got to have family devotional time. And so like I got out my Bible and I'm like, he's a little kid. I've not taught little kids before. What am I supposed to do here? And this is me. Like my whole living is being a preacher and talking about the Word of God. And yet, with a little kid, I'm stumped. I don't know. What do I need to do? Well, I just need to do. And eventually, I said, well, what are we going to do? We're going to get a whole lot of Bible stories, a whole lot of Bible books. You've got some over there, by the way. Yeah? You can just check them out. They're free. So they're there. But you just get these Bible books and you just sit down and we go through our gratitude exercise. What are we thankful for from the day? And then we read the Bible story out of a book. If there are errors or problems, which sometimes there are, we talk about those. And then we pray to God. We sing a song. And it's simple. It's not perfect, but it's done. And you do that every single day. And it's done. It's just like brushing your teeth, right? You brush your teeth every day. Everybody brush your teeth? Yeah. You can do something every day. You've just proved that to yourself, right? So if you can do something every day, you can do this every day. Done is better than perfect. And watch how you create an environment where we're talking about God, and those conversations will mature. One of the most beautiful things that happened, we were walking on a trail one time with the two older boys, and they just stopped and said, "Are we gonna have Bible time?" We stopped right there we were living in Arizona at the time, in the desert. It was hot. And then they said, let's stop and let's have some Bible time. Beautiful. And those moments will happen again if you just start doing and stop waiting for everything to be perfect. Is my child safe? I hope you're asking that question. I hope if you feel like you're beyond that question, you've got grown children, you're still asking that question. I hope if you never had children, you're still asking that question, because if you don't have children, the future of the church is in these little faces all around you. That's the future of the church, and God needs you to be interested in them. Let's ensure that they are safe, and let's absorb the Proverbs as our guide in helping them. This morning, there might be other things on your heart or in your mind. There might be a desire in your heart to know more about the wise ways of God. I'd like to talk to you about that. I'll be more than happy to sit down with you and talk to you about the New Testament and what it shares about salvation and how you can find hope in Jesus in any circumstance, even in a circumstance where there's been less than ideal realities, of divorce and difficulties and rebellious children, all those kinds of things. There's always hope for you, and you never know what else could come of the hope that Jesus can create in you. So do you need help this morning? Is there any way we can help you? There'll be an opportunity for you to talk to us during the song of invitation, but then also afterwards, please come up and talk to me if you have any needs. But let us know what those are if you can now or later.
His love endures forever. Everybody give thanks
to the Lord, for He is good.
For He is good. Come on and give thanks to the Lord, 'cause you know He is good. For He is good.
Give thanks to the Lord, for He is good.
For He is good. His love endures forever. Do you know that His love